Good morning, folks. This is going to be an animation demo for Squash and Stretch. Our goal is to create a bouncing ball similar to the one that is playing on a loop in your handout. The first thing we have to do is open Photoshop and go to Window Workspace Motion. So this is already in the Motion Workspace. Okay, this is the finished file. Let me close it out and I will make a new document. File new. All right, and I'm going to use one of the film and video presets. I think that's a good idea. We'll go with HDTV. All right, so if you're not in Workspace Motion, if you're in Essentials, which is where most of you will start, what you want to do is hit this little drop down and go to Motion. And the reason we want that is it gives us the video timeline. Okay, so I'm going to show you a quick trick. If you hold down the Control key and press the letter H, it will hide these guidelines. Generally speaking, these blue guidelines are there to make sure you have a safe area to put any text. If you were doing credits or anything, you would want it inside the blue boxes because some televisions will end up cutting off the portion outside, what they call the safe zone. For our needs, we don't need to worry about that, so I'm going to hit Control H and just hide that. Okay, so what we have to do is click Create Video Timeline, and then click on the burger bar and set our frame rate. The burger bar is this little guy down here. Okay, set frame rate is grayed out because we need to first click Create Video Timeline. So I'll click that. Here's our timeline. I'm going to scale it up so that we can see our current 5 seconds. We want to go to the burger bar and go to Set Timeline Frame Rate. 29.97 is like standard frame rate for the NTSC. That's like what television looks like in North America. We want to change it to 12. It's okay to have fewer frames, it'll look just fine. So also when we decide to start drawing, 12 frames per second means less drawing for each thing that you want to animate in the future. So we still have 5 seconds as our total timeline. It's just being made with fewer frames. Okay, pop back over to the instructions, click on FPS for 12, click OK, cool. Now, yep, we film and video presets, we got that. We hit our guidelines with hide extras, cool. Now we need to make a layer and we need to name it ball, and on that we need to draw a ball. So I'm going to go to Layer, New, Layer. All right, I'll name it ball, and then I'll click OK. Right now it's an empty layer, so you could draw a ball any way you like. If you wanted to use the elliptical marquee and hold shift, you could do that. Let me hit G. Maybe I can paint bucket this in with a solid color, or maybe I can use a gradient. Let's try a gradient like so. Okay, maybe I'll press Control I to invert it because I want it to look three-dimensional. Okay, that's cool. I'm going to go ahead and hit Control S to save it. I'll call it Squash. Woo. There we go. Squash and Stretch. So our initial animation is going to be setting up just movement. Then after that's done, we're going to make it look more alive and dynamic by adding squash and stretch keyframes. So the only thing that's going to be animated in this project is the ball layer. But for that to happen, we have to convert this layer to a smart object. So once your ball looks like what you want it to look like, I'm going to do Convert to Smart Object. And that way when I unpack it, I have the transform timeline rather than just position. The difference being position won't let you do size changes. It only moves or makes keyframes based on where the object is. It won't let you change the size. We're going to want to free transform this a little bit. So let's establish our first keyframe. Okay, it's a little big, so press Control D to get rid of the selection. Control T for transform. I'm going to scale this bad boy up, or down rather, and then move it up to the top of the screen. Okay. This is going to be the keyframe for the beginning and the end of the animation, but 5 seconds is a little long. So I'm going to shorten this up to 2 seconds on both the ball timeline and the background timeline. Okay, so I'll zoom in a little more with my scaler, again hitting Control S every once in a while just to save what I have. Now here's where we're going to establish a loop. I want my first and last keyframes to be identical, so I'm going to press the diamond, and right now I've gone ahead and added the same keyframe for size, rotation, and position at the beginning and end of my timeline. So that means I can move my blue slider down to the middle, somewhere between 10 frames and 1 full second, and I'm going to press Control T, and I'm going to transform and move this down to the bottom. I want it to be touching the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to rewind it, and I'm going to hit play. Right now we have a ball bouncing. What we don't have is squash and stretch. So here's how we're going to add the squash and stretch. As the ball is moving, we want to elongate it when it's traveling downward and traveling upward. So I'm going to press Control T. I'm just going to drag it downward a touch. So I want it to look like it's kind of stretching downward, okay? And then the frame before it hits the ground, I'm going to go back 1 frame, and I'm going to press Control T, and I'm going to move it to the ground, but squish it out. Okay. So now, and I also want it to still stay stretchy. I don't want it to start shrinking back yet until it hits the ground. So I'm going to go to the frame before that and stretch it up still. So I want it to be stretchy. All right, so we're stretchy, hitting the ground. Maybe I'll have it hit the ground. Next frame, I'm going to press Control T, make it squishy and stretched out a touch. And I'll go forward a little bit. Control T, stretch it back down, shrink it down just a little more. Let's see, rink, bloop. Good. All right, so we have stretch, squash, and then on the way back up, I also want it to stretch. So we go bloop, and then it kind of reforms, and then ideally it's going to play back nice and smooth on a loop for us. So to sum up, you want to be the same position for your beginning and end. Somewhere near the middle, you want to bring it down and have it touch. And then as it travels downward, you stretch it. As it travels upward, you stretch it. And then you just need to add the keyframes when it hits the ground, expands a touch, and then kind of reforms to go back up. So I'm going to hit Control S to save. I'm going to do File, Export, Render Video, and I'm going to have it spit out a video file. Let's see, squash and stretch. It's going to my desktop folder. If you want to choose a different folder, you can. I might recommend you choose the videos folder. Okay. Oop, it's being problematic with the videos folder. How about we just do pictures? Bloop. All right, so I'm going to send this to the pictures folder. It's got the YouTube preset. All that is good. 23 frames. Awesome. Render it. It's still churning and bubbling. And then from there, we'll be able to insert that video into our sketchbooks by uploading it to Google Drive. Another way that you can show your work is to do File, Export, and then go to this Save for Web Legacy option. That's going to let you export it as an animated GIF file. Now, it's a little big for an animated GIF. I could probably take my image size and cut it down to, let me do 720. That'll reduce the size a little bit. And I'm going to press the save button. You can see the default option for a looping animation is to repeat forever. That's perfect. That's exactly how I got the ball bounce into the handout. Okay, so squash and stretch. Call it squash and stretch demo, short for demonstration. We'll save that on the desktop. Okay. Now let's check back in with our handout. We did that. Yep, we set up our keyframes, the purple bar, unpacking the timeline, the blue slider, all that stuff. Whoop, got a little punctuation error there. All right, adding keyframes. Yep, the squash and the stretch. Good. Okay, I think you guys have this. Save your work as you go. If you need to get rid of a keyframe, if there's something, you know, if it starts to squash before it gets to the ground, or you think, boy, this frame doesn't look right, just go over to the diamond and click it, and that will remove it. Or you can right click on any of the diamonds in your timeline and tell it to delete. Okay, so if I want this doink to be lower, I can have it squash differently. Okay. So stretching down, squashing, bouncing back up. All right, that's the whole trick.